Stepped on it.
Yeah.
I had to. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Godspot Podcast. I am your host, Karen Smith, and I am here with my lovely wife behind the camera. You are not seeing her today either. But that is not the topic at hand. We are back on generational data, right, babe?
Yeah.
Generational data. And today we're picking back up where we left off at. Disclaimer first. I did want to say this because I've had a lot of people reach out to me and you guys are like asking me about like the ranges that I'm picking as far as like the generations. Well, I mentioned it. I think I mentioned it in the first video and then probably the second or the last one. But these dates, like the years, they tend to like shift. So like they might start out like I think with Gen X the last year they said I can't remember, but I know one person reached out to me on YouTube and another through email, and they were asking like, is this date included? And I was kind of telling them like, yeah, you know, if you look at the most updated version of this, like you'll see that it's it actually includes these last 3 years or these last 4 years. So yeah, I've had to specify that for a couple of people. So yeah, it's not me. I'm not trying to include your year in whatever generation that maybe historically people have told you fall in. It's just the data, man. It shifts. So yeah, I want you to be whatever you want to be. If you want to be a Gen X, I want you to be Gen X. If you want to be a millennial, I want you to be a millennial. Yeah, but it's not me. I swear it's the data. So we've done our best, especially me. I've worked overtime to make sure that these dates are as close as they possibly can. So we're back at it, generational data. Baby boomers.
That's good.
Okay, baby boomers. I got some notes too.
Yes, babe. So why don't you tell us about the baby boomers and how their name came about?
Okay, so we know that baby boomers, they are the group that are namingly, they say they were born after World War II. So, and I say namely because it's like that's kind of where it's like a pun intended. It's like baby boomers, World War II. It's like when I was doing my research, that was kind of like a long standing like little type of joke that they had going there. So not funny, honestly, though, because World War II was horrible. But yeah, so it says born between 1946 and 1964, but up to 1968, right?
Okay.
So we're not going to say like baby boomers stop at 1964. We're not going to say that. The data shows that they go at least from 1946 up to 68.
Okay.
Right. So, and I've seen that shift with millennials. We talked about that before. So, fun fact, right, which I'm sure a lot of people know, they got their name because of the baby boom that happened, right? So it wasn't just like, oh, babies are being born, boom. It wasn't something weird like that. It was more like these babies that were born post World War II, like it caused massive population growth, right?
What did that look like, the growth?
So it says by 1964, this generation of 80 million comprised 40% of the U.S. population. So they basically took up 40% of the U.S. population by 1964, just the baby boomers.
That's wild.
Yeah, so it was like it's a huge thing because if you go back and you're looking at like, and I did this when I was studying through all the generations, but if you go back and you look at the data, like it kind of tells you, like based on that range of the generation. Remember we talked about it's usually about a 15, maybe 18-year span for the generation. It shows you like how many babies were born like during that 15 or whatever, however many year span. And it's like I think for I'm gonna have to go back and do this, and this is probably gonna come in like a later episode. But I think for millennials or Gen Z, it was like 20 million. That's what I'm saying. And I think for Gen X, it was I think it was like anywhere from 25 to 35.
Okay.
So I'm literally like, this is 40% of the population. I think Gen Xers maybe were 25 to 30 actually. This is 40% of the population, just baby boomers.
That's mind blowing.
Yeah, so that's really where they get their coin term from, baby boomers, because it was like a baby boom. Like it's like boom, 80 million of us, we out here, we taking up 40% of the population. So it was like, yo, that was really crazy. Okay, so here's a fun fact, right? Which I'm curious to see how many of you guys are familiar with this, like how many people know about this.
Yeah.
So the first boomers, like boomers 1, were born between 1946 and 1956, while boomers 2, aka Generation Jones, were born between 1956 and 1964 to 68. So I don't know why they did that.
That's confusing.
It is, right? And I tried this out on a boomer that I work with, right? We know my mentor is a baby boomer. So I went to Todd, and based on the information, he would have had that coin term, Gen Jones, because the year he was born in. I think Todd was born in 68.
Okay.
So I went to him and I was like, hey, have you ever been, or has your generation ever been called Generation Jones, or are you familiar with that term? And he was kind of like, no, I've never really heard of it. So that instantly made me curious, right? Not necessarily like it's a lie, because if you do a little bit of research, it is out there. It's not out there as much as like the baby boomers term, but it's out there, right? But it made me curious. I'm like, So I wonder if the Gen Jonesers were really between 1956, like the beginning, like I stated, and instead of from 64 to 68, maybe they're from like 1956 to like 61. Like maybe it's like a small gap.
And what makes you think that?
Because during my research, like going through all of the different articles and all of the different stats, it seems as if Gen X and like the baby boomers 2 of what they're calling it, which is why boomers are so long, because they have it into like 2 parts. It seems like they say like that early part of like Gen X and most of Gen X, and then that second segment of boomers, they all kind of got lost just within baby boomers as a whole, right?
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like, because it was just such a massive generation, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like a lot of things were like lumped in together. Gen X, like I've seen their years fluctuate probably the most when it comes to like their last year. Like I've seen them stop them at 77, but then I've saw a recent statistic where they stopped them at 80. 1980, and that was probably the latest I've seen. So I was like, wow, I didn't know Gen X would go all the way up to 1980. But based on the statistics, like they move it, like they move it. And I think that's just because over a course of research, and they're watching, like we talked about this, the behaviors, and like over a course of time, like, okay, we thought, these people in this year would fit into Gen X, but this latter year is actually acting like more like a boomer, and we thought like this would be a millennial, but the oldest millennial is actually probably 41, instead of like 40 or 39. So I think over just a course of like watching behavioral statistics and gathering that research and data, that R&D, right? They develop all of these statistics, and they start to see like, oh, okay, like, yeah, these people are actually acting like these people, and these people are actually. So I think that's why we see the years shift to begin with. But the interesting part about it, the Gen Joneses, is that the reason why they're so different is because the lifestyles of the parents, number one, and what was going on at that time, like during the war, because that affected the parents. So I'm not going to cheat and talk about it before you read your part.
Yeah, no.
Let him hear you, baby. Let him hear you.
Okay, so coined in 1999 by author Jonathan Pontel, a 2019 article about baby boomers reads as follows. What is Generation Jones? The difference between Gen Jonesers and baby boomers. Generation Jones refers to people born between 1954 and 1964 to 65. We sometimes call them the lost generation. They have this nickname because they were born between the baby boomers and Generation X birth dates. Gen X people were born between the mid 1960s and the late 1970s. Some people, however, insist that Generation Jones's birth date began in 1956 or 1957. If you were born between 1954 to 56 and 1964 to 65, you might also call yourself a Gen Joneser. Initially, we mistakenly lumped Gen Jonesers with baby boomers because they were born during a high birth rate period. However, over time, sociologists began to embrace Generation Jones as a separate generation. Baby boomers were born immediately after the Second World War when couples started thinking about starting a family. After the Second World War, there was a baby boom, hence the name.
Yeah, hence the name. So the Jonesers, it took some time for researchers to develop that group.
Yeah.
And I think because it took so long, that's why some individuals who would be a part of that generation, the part two Gen Jonesers, I think that's why they haven't heard of it too. Because because it took them a long time to coin that term for them because they kind of got just lumped in. You have this massive population of baby boomers, this generation being born, and then the Gen Xers are following behind them. But in the midst of that, it was like the baby boomers were just so large. They just kept going that they had trouble lumping them in somewhere. So it's kind of like later on they realized like, oh, there's actually a group of people within the baby boomers that aren't acting exactly like baby boomers.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense too. That's kind of what you were saying before. Okay. So, what is another prominent difference between the two generations?
Okay, like if we split them, like baby boomers 1 and Gen Jonesers being 2.
Yes.
So I thought this was really interesting. So unlike many baby boomers, most of Gen Jones did not have 1 or 2 parents that were veterans. Yeah, and that's like a big deal. Because just think about it, the difference between a veteran household and a non-veteran household.
There's a huge difference.
Yeah, fortunately, our children won't have to deal with 2 veteran parents, but they will have to deal with at least 1.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think that it is a grave difference between a household with veteran parents and not. And also the war that we're talking about was a pretty brutal war. So I could just imagine how a lot of these men were at home. That type of war, that type of trauma, PTSD, all of this stuff, depression going on, and at certain points them barely having names, to call these things. And it's just like, it makes sense, right? Because it seems that if the Generation Jones did not have, so that would mean that most of Generation Jones did not have 2. Most of Gen Jones. So if they were born like in the latter part of the baby boomers, that means the earlier baby boomers, their parents probably were the veterans.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Because Gen Jones did not have 2 veteran parents, at least, right?
So that's not how they differentiated them?
Right. That was one, like it seems that the research points out that that was a super important reason, and pretty distinctive for them. And I'll get a little bit into it. We can't go too deep into it. But it seems like the earlier part of the baby boomers, those were the veterans, and the later part, which they're calling Gen Joneses, were not.
Okay.
Right? So, and that makes sense if we think about the years in the span of the war. But the grave difference, I mean, I know how different households are just being out of the Marine Corps, like not being on active duty and having friends that are still on active duty, friends that are veterans, and friends that are the straight civilians. They've never been in the military at all. And it's like night and day. You know what I mean? And literally between all of them, because clearly the household that the parents are now vets, right? Which, if it hasn't changed, I think you only need to serve 3 years on active duty to be considered a veteran.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if it hasn't changed, you got the vet. So that might be a person that did one tour or maybe 8 years in the military, but they're out now. You know what I mean? So maybe they're a little bit more acclimated to regular life, like you used to always get on me about. And then the person that's on active duty, they're like knee deep in, you know what I mean? And then the person that has never been in the military, but maybe had military parents, still very different from these two people, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is pretty grave, because I could just imagine and it makes sense because when I was doing my research, it said that like between the two generations, like sometimes the earlier boomers, like some of them didn't have like TV sets in their home, even though you could get them. And I'm thinking to myself while I'm researching, like, why would that be? But it would make sense for veteran parents. They wouldn't want to watch that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like they don't want to see any coverage about the war or anything going on. And these people are struggling with PTSD at this point, but people barely know what's going on with them. They just think they're stressed out, from the war, but it's deeper than that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they actually like really went home on that point as to like one of the biggest and gravest differences was the two. One having veteran parents, one household having veteran parents, and one household not. And then because of that dynamic, like the earlier part of the generation might not have really experienced TV so much. And then depending on if Jonesers were a part of the war at some point, because it would depend on how old the parents were, right? They might not have television sets. So I was just like, wow, that's really, I thought it was crazy.
So can you talk about some critical events that form the personality of the boomer?
Yeah, this is fun, right? So boomers they are such an influential generation. Like and this, as we talk about this, it'll come out again, but hands down, baby boomers are the most influential generation on the planet, period. Like, period. So I know they're not the first generation, but influential. And I mean, like, if you just go down a list of baby boomers today, like celebrity baby boomers, there's some heavy hitters there. So this is just like something that is just throughout this generation. You know what I mean? Like, they're heavy, man. Like, they're a big deal, as far as influencing us.
And do these critical events that you're bringing up have to take part in why they're influential?
Well, here's the thing. Because there's such an influential generation, baby boomers have a personality that's actually talked about. So, like, it's like the baby boomer personality. I love it. So, and this, I did the math. I'm like, this is like a 15-year span, right? So I'm not going to say from the age of 0 to 15 because clearly it would be some things that individual wouldn't remember. But from like 15 to 30, right? 30 to 45, right? I'm like 50 to 65. You would have a pretty keen memory about things that would have went on in that time span at those particular ages. This is some heavy stuff that boomers went through in a 15-year span. And if during these years they were old enough to actually understand like what was going on, depending on what age they were, I'm like, this is why, like, some of these events that I'm about to list, this is why there's such a life-changing, influential generation. So we got, in 1955, right, Rosa Parks refuses to move to the back of the bus, right? This is like game-changing moment, right? Game-changing moment. 1963, Martin Luther King leads the march on Washington, D.C. Another historic moment went down in U.S. history, right? 1963, same year, President John Kennedy assassinated. I'm like, wow. So, and I'm sitting there just putting myself in this era, and I'm like, we're not even that deep yet. And it's like, that's a lot. 1 year later, 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is passed. Okay, so that was the act that prevented like racial discrimination, and like you can't like hire somebody based on race or religion or discriminate because of reasons like that. So that was passed. Another big deal, right? Which I thought was awesome right after John Kennedy was assassinated. Not that it was awesome that he was assassinated, but I'm like, why couldn't that have happened like the year before? I'm like, okay, that sucks. But and then another year later, 1965, the United States sends ground troops to Vietnam. Wow. We already know the Vietnam War was heinous, to say the least. 1966, the National Organization for Women was founded, right? Yeah. Okay. So now some people like super happy about this. Some people not so happy about this, because this is the organization that basically did birth women's rights, right? Which also includes reproductive rights. Yeah. I have no sound effects, but womp womp. That's all I'll say. 1968, 2 years later, Martin Luther King assassinated. So we have President Kennedy was assassinated in 1963. 5 years later, Martin Luther King assassinated.
That was even 5 years later from him leading the march.
1968. Yeah, was it?
Yeah, 5 years. 1963 leads the march.
Yeah, he did lead it. Yeah. So 5 years. 5 years later, Martin Luther King assassinated in 1968. The same year, John Kennedy's brother assassinated.
That's wild.
1 year later, 1969, the first moon landing. 1 year later, 1970, Kent State University shootings. The Kent State shootings became the focal point of a nation deeply divided by the Vietnam War. So Kent State is a university. Yeah. It's a college. Okay. Yeah, and there was a shooting, like we see shootings today. And a lot of people did get hurt, but I believe 5 students died, right? And this happened because of, I believe there was some bombings that was going on in Cambodia, I want to say. And like the US was doing it, and people were hot. So they started protesting, and like, I think these students had a run-in with the National Guard. Yeah. Or it was some sector of the military. I want to say it was the National Guard. And 5 students died. And that's what the focal point of a nation deeply divided by a Vietnam War. This was heavy for baby boomers, Yeah. So it's like, if you just think about that 15-year span, I'm like, wow.
It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I'm like, it's heavy. You know what I mean? And just think about these events that are happening. I'm like, this is why this generation is so influential.
Yeah.
Like,
the type of stuff they've seen, witnessed,
yeah.
part of.
Like, I'm like, the first moon landing. I mean, it makes sense that out of boomers, we get people that literally, like, they were like shooting for change, like breaking molds. Like, it's like that literally is the foundation of that generation. That's how they roll.
Yeah, you could see with everything.
Yeah, it's like whatever they do, man, they're gonna do it with like heart, grit, like passion. It's gonna mean something to them. And it's like, man, when I was just looking at these events, I'm like, sheesh. I'm like, in a 15-year span, all of those things, that's heavy.
It really is.
That's enough for a person to be like, what is the world coming to?
Oh yeah. I think it was enough after the third one you mentioned.
Right. And that's like, and that's without them even seeing the things that we've seen.
Yeah.
Like 9/11.
That added on top of
it. All of these, like, that the Kent, like, it was horrible. Seriously, nothing minor about it at all. It was disgusting. But 5 students died.
Yeah.
we see people going there and they're shooting up schools. Like it's not like nobody's protesting. They're shooting up like third graders and first graders.
Yeah.
It's like these people, this is horrifying, you know? So they saw this type of stuff and they basically just seen it get worse.
Yeah, if you think about it, because now you see kids like 19 dead and like 4 injured or vice versa. And I'm like, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's like, it makes so much sense to me why baby boomers, like classic, it was like, this earth was going to hell in a handbasket.
I know.
Like,
I heard that.
I'm just like, classic. So let's see, between the very end of the silent generation and the beginning of the boom generation, the computer was built. Boomers rock.
They do.
They built the computer.
Thank you.
I'm going to say it again. The first digital computer began construction, yes, in 1943, and I believe it was completed in 1946.
That's awesome. It took 3 years for them to do that.
Bro.
That's crazy amazing.
Babe. Like, they wasn't building MacBooks.
I know. But
I'm just saying.
But still, there's a lot.
And that only took 3 years. You know how many times I have seen Apple or Microsoft, I don't know, whoever, Windows, all of them people push back a device because it's not ready yet.
Yeah. Now they say that. Yeah.
These baby boomers worked with probably a quarter of what we have now, and they built a computer in 3 years. Listen, people discount this generation so much, it irks my soul.
That's very, I'm like, wow.
And in the workplace, it's nasty because they're getting older. You know what I mean? They're 55, 52, 58. They're getting older, right? So people are discounting them. You know?
They do that as people get older, especially
Right.
in the workplace.
And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, bro,
Stop it.
exact. This is why we're married. Because that's exactly what I was about to say. I'm like, seriously? You're discounting a person of a generation that built, not a computer. Yeah, because there were a couple that were like, when I was doing the research, and this was so cool though, but even before that, there were a couple that were like they were trying to bring them into fruition, but they were having trouble with it. Like something wouldn't work or something wouldn't transfer over right. But it was showing like pictures of it. And it's like, first of all, have you seen, did I show you at any point in time what a computer looked like from this generation when they were building it?
Not from that, like 19, no.
Okay, our bedroom was a computer.
Oh my gosh, because I remember growing up, like, the PCs that looked like the TVs, and they were already big to me. So I'm like, our whole room.
Like, you could walk into it.
What the?
Yeah, like that's literally.
All the way to iPads and stuff.
Yeah, that's it. So baby boomers are often known for their, so this is the thing, like I made these notes about the strong work ethic and the goal centric inclinations. They tend to be hardworking, value face-to-face interaction. This is the thing about boomers, like this is like very foundational for this generation, right? Work ethic is ham.
Yeah.
Like it's crazy. Literally, like, listen to me. Boomers, they be in workplaces running circles around millennials and Gen Zers. Like circle. And I'm talking about when they come to work one time, like whatever time they choose to come to work, 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, 7, 8, 9, they're there that time every day.
Yeah. Every day. Not a minute later.
If anything, 2 minutes early.
Yep.
Like they're there that time every day.
Yeah.
And I remember working like a couple years ago with like people who were in the generation of boomers. And I would be coming into work and I'm like, yo, how does Joe beat me to work every day? Like, I'm like, what is up with this dude? Like, in order for me to beat a boomer to work, I literally have to wake up an hour early.
Wow. And you already wake up early.
That's what I'm saying. And I get to work early. When I say they don't play, like, they don't play. Like, this is like foundational for this generation. The work ethic, what did I say? Goal-centric inclinations. I was being fancy with it. Like, listen. When my mentor makes a goal at work, it's like, that's it.
And he's a baby boomer.
Yeah, we might as well wrap it up. Like,
Yeah.
and he's dead serious. Like, he's like, dude, like, I'm not talking to people until this is completed. Like, literally, like, that's how he is.
Dedication.
He is not, and he's not playing. Like, of course he'll stop, and if someone comes to ask him something, but especially if we playing a long game and it's like end of year type goals that we're trying to make, no, like, he's not playing.
That's so crazy to think about that with baby boomers. And with certain generations, you just don't see.
Like, I'm leaving work to, like, you know, do whatever it is I have to do after work, whether it's ministry wise, recreational wise, with you and I.
Yeah.
And my man is pulling 12, 13-hour days. At 58. Like, he's not playing. Like, he's not playing. Like,
For real or not?
yeah, I'm sitting there like, this is, it's. I have a great work ethic, right? So I've been told.
You do.
I try, right? Thank you. I love you. Thank you. But literally, when you see that, like, to me, and I'm a very disciplined person, that's impeccable to me. Just the longevity of it, because I know he's been like that all his life.
Yeah.
You know, so just to see him so close to 60, and it's like, it's like he's barely burning oil.
The way they maintain.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, he's steady with it. You know, he's consistent with it. He's loyal with it. He's dedicated to it. You know, like, I'm just like, man, do I think that there could be a downside to that?
Oh, yeah.
Slightly. Mainly with the boomer generation. There's reason for that, right?
What's the reasoning?
Well, let's see. The baby boomer generation is very much still into work ethic, but that's never going to change about them. Yeah. That's just foundational about them. Pay your dues, very competitive. They associate work and positions and titles with self-worth.
Yeah, they do.
Self-worth. I mean, it could be very competitive in the workplace. We know that. But to associate all of that with self-worth.
That's a lot of pressure on yourself. You know that?
That's dangerous.
Yeah.
That's insanely dangerous.
That's why people can stop working, because it's hard to find a job and they can feel defeated.
Yeah. I remember the first time I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the first one by Robert Kiyosaki, and he was talking about how when his dad got laid off from the Board of Education, I think they were living in Hawaii at the time, and I forgot what age he mentioned his dad was, but he was older when it happened. He had to be in his 50s or 60s, and he's like I watched my dad get laid off after however long he had been doing it, and like at that age, I had to watch my father look for a job again. You know what I mean? But it's like heartbreaking, of course.
Yeah.
But that's their drive. Like, it's like at 57, at 58, at 60, like, I'm out here.
And it's amazing because they, you know, they're the ones who work for 20, 30 years and they get fired, but at the next job, they're the same way.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's why it's like, they're like, we out here with the 20-year-olds, the 19-year-olds, the 30-year-olds, the 40-year-olds. They're like, and my resume is banging. And because I'm a boomer, if you just give me the interview, you gonna hire me.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I watch it happen so much that I'm just like, yo.
Okay.
So this was probably one point that I could not wait to talk about. Boomers hold the wealth when you compare generations, right? So they mainly benefited. I thought this was so awesome, but watch this. They mainly benefited from the post-World War II economy, right? So things were so bad, declining tax rates, right? But on high income homes. So think about it. Tax rates are dropping, but they making bank.
Oh, snap.
Like, it's not like, we're not talking about a $20,000, $25,000 a year salary, $30,000, $40,000 a year salary. Even though, you know, at this point in time, wouldn't be bad at all. But we're talking about somebody that might have been making $100K, $150K a year, right?
Oh, wow.
And tax rates are dropping. They're not doing what they're doing now,
So that
right?
means that they're keeping more of their money.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay.
A lot more of their money, right? And on high income homes, and there was a strong stock market at the time. So they cleaned up.
Yeah.
It's safe to say they cleaned up during that time, because that lasted for a couple of years due to the war.
Yeah.
So, and I made this point so I wouldn't forget it. Boomers and Gen Xers, right? So mainly boomers, right? By far. But these two generations out of and I work with multi-generations. I don't think, we don't have 7, probably 6 generations in my workplace. Maybe 5, but maybe 6, but definitely 5. But baby boomers and Gen X, by far the biggest nest eggs out of all the generations. The biggest retirements saved away, put away. If it's not a 401k, it's something that they got going, some type of IRA or whatever they did, but in their stocks, their portfolios are versed, like, and they're in the market. Like, these two generations, especially like boomers, like, they are in the market. And that's the thing. If you look at that, those generations like dominate as far as like buying with shares and things like that. It's not like it's millennials.
Yeah.
Or it's even Gen Zers that have money. It is still like baby boomers and mainly Gen Xers.
Those two. Okay, I was trying to.
So we talked about that. People write them off, right? I thought this was so fun. People write them off and they do math by hand.
Yeah.
Like, my mentor told me that his daughter tells him this all of the time. Like, she's like, Dad, you could do like, you know, like calculus or something on your hands. You know what I mean? Like, and it's crazy because I understand. I watched it and I'm looking and I'm wondering, are you going to pick up the calculator?
Nope.
And he never, like, he does at some point, but for a long time he does it.
Yeah, so he has it in his hand for a vague amount of time.
And I'm looking at him like, is he about to do all this in his head? Like, and I was watching him and he's literally doing it like that. Like, he's using a ruler. Because we work, you know, sometimes we have to calculate certain things. So we use like the real small rulers, the metal ones. And where I can measure like 10,000ths and things like that. Wow. And he's just using this ruler to calculate all of this. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, how are you getting that? You know, and then he shows it to me and I'm just like, what just happened? Like, these are baby boomers. Yeah. They do math on their hand and people write them off. I'm like, are you crazy? Do you not know a millennial and a Gen Zer? If you ask us to do math without a calculator, unless math was one of our favorite subjects, our brain will just melt.
It's like a brain fart.
Like, literally, that's what I was thinking to myself. I'm like, and notice I said, unless math is your favorite subject. So I'm not counting out, you know, the math geniuses. I would say I had probably 2 of my siblings, like, probably really love math. You know, math wasn't horrible for me, but I was more of a science, you know. So I was more of a science guy. I'm like, I like to blow things up and melt things and look at weird stuff under microscopes. Yeah, I was more that person. But people are writing these people off and they do math by hand.
That's crazy.
If you do not love math, who does math by hand?
Nobody.
Exactly. The baby boomers do. Point. That's my point. So they are still the most influential generation today. We talked about that. They tend to control access to capital, political relationships, and Great Lakes. So I love these points about baby boomers. The most influential generation, period.
Yeah.
Hands down.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody. The only people that might get close to them, and research shows this, statistics shows this, probably millennials.
Which is crazy.
And I think, you know what I think that's attributed to, though?
I was about to ask.
I think that's going to go in what we'll talk about at some point in the near future, that correlation to like religious affiliation.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because, I mean, I'm just saying, and I'm saying, if you love Jesus,
Yeah.
that kind of matters.
That matters more.
Our generation still does have that reverence, and they say that it's falling off with millennials, and things like that. We know our Gen Xers are the most skeptical, like I like the way Lecrae said it, the gatekeepers, the skeptics got to be at the gate. That way everybody don't get let in. So they have to be there. But really like millennials, when you look deeper into this research, because I had to do even more research than what I already knew, because I'm already a geek with this stuff.
Yeah.
So I had to do even more. So I went deeper. And it's like when you look at it, we've talked about this, the religious affiliation has done nothing but decline since the silent generation. That's all it's done. Right? The biggest drop was probably, we talked about 2 big drops from boomers to Gen X, and then from millennials to Gen Z, right? So it didn't drop too much between Gen X and millennials being born, but when it went from millennials to Gen Z, dip. I think we talked about it, maybe 7% dip, 6, 8, somewhere between 6 and 8. Yeah, so I was like, wow, that is, I think that matters. And we do that Gen Alpha, which they're dubbing, we talked about this, the mini millennial. So those are the millennials' children. So I could see why that, but that doesn't mean, of course, that does not mean something like Gen Z is lost. That's crazy. That's not true. Come on, be real. God always has a remnant. Come on. You know what I mean? Like, so Gen Z is not lost. The whole generation, that's literally ridiculous to even say.
But that's why I think the dates change so much, because behaviors change.
Yeah. And they have to watch it. They have to place it. Oh, they're not acting like we thought, so they go here. So I don't think that Gen Z is completely lost. I have Gen Z siblings. They can't be completely lost with me in their life.
No.
That's just not possible. You know what I mean? So it's like, as long as I have conversations with them, or I'm breathing and I'm talking to them, they're going to hear the name Jesus.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I know that there are more millennials that are like that. And if it's not their siblings, it's their cousins or their friends or their parents or their co-workers. So it's like, come on now. We know this about God. He's in control. Stop it. They tend to control access to Dude, this was such an attractive trait about them. Baby boomers control access to capital. Like, this generation by far has the world, like, if we count the whole entire world, they probably have the largest capital within their generation. Like, the baby boomers have probably, I don't remember the percentage. I don't know if it's 40 or if it's 30, but they literally have 30 to 40% of the world's capital.
Wow, 30 to 40%.
Capital, meaning that bread.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, money.
Wow.
And I literally am looking at this, I'm like, dude.
It makes sense.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, when we talked about the post-World War II stuff, it's just like, yo, these people really cleaned up. Amongst other things, they're really smart. They saw a lot of things happen. So they was like, this world's going to blow up at any moment. So I'm just going to make sure that I can take care of my family, and then when we blow up, I love God, because I'm a baby boomer. And that generation was pretty strong in a religious affiliation. Even if currently they're not going to church, or they had a long break when they didn't. They, like, baby boomers, like, from the silent generation to them, there was a very high reverence for God amongst those 2 generations. It really started to dip with Gen X and down.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, I think you showed me. That was crazy.
Yeah, but Gen X they're still in there, So, this was dope.
Yeah, it was really
I
good.
was hyped to do boomers, as I'm sure you could tell.
Yeah, he was pumped.
But you liked it too.
I did.
Yeah, I mean, our moms are boomers.
I know, and I was thinking about
our
that
dads. Yeah. Let's see. My mentor. I think every mentor in my life is a boomer. Like, whether it's Was the movie proven right by our children? Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Baby Boomers. We talked about the baby boomer generation. Yeah, man, so my camera died, but you know what? It ended exactly where the Lord wanted it to end. So I hope that you guys enjoyed that episode. Stay tuned for the next episode we're dropping. We're going to do something on the silent generation. So we're going to talk about the generation before the boomers. So make sure you stay tuned. Don't forget to drop a like. Help this go up the algorithm. Help it go out to people. But don't forget to drop a like if you liked it. If you don't, I understand. But subscribe. So we love you guys. Stay tuned. See you next time. Peace.
Bye.